I'm going to be talking about an argument which, in a sense, goes against the grain, as Joe said, against both orthodox theory and some traditions in heterodox economics, particularly the post-Keynesian tradition. I'm going to try to make clear that I do so as a friend of that tradition. I myself wrote my MA thesis on Kalecki. So I'm going to focus on real consumer behavior, and I'm going to show something which I learned from my teacher, Gary Becker, that you can use the structure of real behavior to derive the key points on the macroeconomic theory of demand. That is downward sloping demand curves, which is the foundation of everything. Engel's law, the consumption function. These things can be derived without any reference to rationality, rational choice, and all the other elements of standard neoclassical economics. And then I'm going to go on to talk about the equivalent on the supply side, which is the theory of the firm, and argue that there is and has always been a powerful framework there. And I'm taking the elements of my argument, and lastly I'm going to show that the theory of real competition provides a natural foundation for Keynes. And I'd be happy to defend that, but anyway, I do so in the book. The book I'm going to mention in a minute. That's the book. I urge you to buy it in large numbers because my returns depend on that, but I have to say that it's already available in PDF in a Russian website, so my income has disappeared from this. I want to reject the division between imperfect and perfect competition, because that ties you to perfect competition. As I often say, it's like saying that the church has some bad priests. Well, that still ties you to the church. So the ideology of the church, of any church, is a certain construction. And arguing that reality is not exactly like that is not a useful way, in my opinion, to proceed. I want to argue that the dominant motive of capitalism is profit. And that's the thing that binds together the classical economists, Smith certainly, Marx, Keynes, who says profit is the engine which drives enterprise. And I want to show that that simple proposition, made concrete, explains a huge number of phenomena. Of course, it doesn't explain everything. No theory can attempt to do that, but that means that this is the foundation in which you have to add the other elements, to bring in the other elements, not as deviation, but as concretization. But again, my purpose is not to say what Marx really meant to say, nor what Keynes really meant to say, but to argue that we can excavate from these four main authors, Smith, Ricardo, Marx, and Keynes, a logical, consistent foundation which goes from micro to macro, encompasses consumer behavior, encompasses firm behaviors. This is an outline, I keep forgetting what I'm meaning to say. This is an outline of the book, 3 parts, foundation of the analysis, which has data and issues of micro foundations, consumer behavior, production. What does a cost curve really look like? Well, we can find out. We could go and look at cost curves in businesses. I show, for instance, the cost curve in General Motors. If you go through a micro textbook, and actually do that in some things, we take a micro textbook like Varian, and we kind of chop it up. What part of it is empirical, and what part of it is a derivation of this? And I'm basically saying you don't need the derivation for 2 reasons. First of all, you don't need it, and second, because it's not true. So what's the principle which regulates relative prices, exchange rates, interest rates, the old idea of equalization of profit rates? And when I began to look at the measure of that, I discovered, as you always do when you read the history of thought, that somebody else had thought of it before. In this case, it was Kaldor. And here's the picture you get when you look at the incremental rate of return. Now, I show this applies across countries, across time, across different industries, and what you're seeing here is exactly what I understand to be said in Smith and Ricardo and Marx especially, that this process of equalization is turbulent, it's constant, it has cycles hidden in the shocks and so on. And so to me, this is what is meant by equalization of profit rates. Actually, I didn't plot them because when I went to the New School from Columbia, New School didn't have a computer. So I couldn't plot them. I literally, I would have to calculate them. But my friend Sheldon Danziger, who was at MIT, put them on the MIT computer, and it was the first time I saw the data, and absolutely it fits. And in the book I show many, many different tables and many different years, different measurements, vector norms and all of that. But the point is, Ricardo was right. To the argument that I'm making is that the rate of return which drives investment is the rate of return on investment. It's what Keynes calls the marginal efficiency of capital. I'm on the left. I've never been embarrassed by that fact, but it doesn't mean I believe that everything the left believes is true. And one of my concerns is that if you believe that you can pump up the economy and not have these negative effects, then being wrong is not just that you're wrong, it's that people get disillusioned with your answer and they turn somewhere else, and they will turn to the right. Look at what happened with Brazil and Argentina. I argue in the book that's exactly what did happen. That the state must be understood as operating within the domain of the dominance of profitability. That's my take-home point. You cannot get profitability out of the story.